Throughout humanity, some things are fundamentally transformative and impactful in their nature. They've been present in much of history and human experience, leaving an imprint and narrative that can never be understated. Guns, germs, and steel all come to mind, undeniably part of the existence of what it means to be human. However, we don't wander through the TTRPG YouTube channels looking for video essays for the mundane and understood, do we? Perhaps there's something else so terribly solidified in human experience that its popularity and availability gives a bit of an underappreciated element to their existence. Yes, of course, that distant beat of titanic wings in the distance, the echoing thunderous boom of a roar as the shadow swallows the land beneath its form. We're of course addressing the dragon in this thesis of a monster. Now, let's get a little bit of dialogue done at the front end. This video is part of Monster Week, which is Pointy Hat and Jenny D's yearly Monster Week, where they pick a creature and the YouTube TTRPG community comes together to pool and pour our thoughts on said creature into one concentrated time. Funnily enough, last year during Kraken Week, I was idly sitting on the sideline working on my world building video as it was going on, my hungry ambitions swelling to want to race onto the scene to ensure that I was part of the next one. I was originally going to host an event known as Dragon's March, where we talk about dragons for the whole month of March. Well, life got busy, but great minds think alike, so I'm able to put a lot of the brain power towards our scaled friends in regardless. So thanks again to Jenny and Pointy for being on the same wavelength as this silly little bird. So what is a dragon? I always have fun when I take a gander at a literal definition or two, so let's do a quick Google search. A mythical monster resembling a giant reptile, sometimes shown as having wings. In European tradition, the dragon is typically breathing fire and tends to symbolize chaos or evil, whereas in East Asia, it is usually a benefit symbol of fertility associated with water and the heavens. Certainly entertaining enough, and generally get a lot of the core principles. Not shabby at all, but you all know. This video, as well as many of my other previous video links, wouldn't be justified if I just went surface level. So where can we go deeper? You know to go beyond, plus ultra and all of that. Let's take a gander at my favorite resource and reference all the literary and mythological story elements. Overly Sarcastic Productions. They had a video on dragons a while back, and it did fundamentally change how I view and approach them as a whole. As per the usual, the links will be in the description. I want you all to go and watch these resources as I compile them. Expand your knowledge and come back and give me your feedback and reflection. I hunger for the conversations. And I'm generally a greedy magpie. Let's take a look at the general overview of the video. It will go much more in depth on a lot of the other elements, but the core takeaway I want you to all be thinking about is that there is no definition to dragon. They are the everything monster. Well, yes, as per most things, they have traits that we tend to assign to them. I wouldn't have much to talk about without the cornerstones and fundamentals to review. Break up and enjoy them. Watch the video and hear Red talk about the drakes. You can't help but really understand that dragons get around, and if we're talking throughout history, they get around more than the party's bard, who surprisingly doesn't have a relationship, or if they do, it isn't healthy in real life. What do I mean by calling them an everything monster? There is next to nothing that can be seen as universally consistent with dragons. There isn't one origin point, different civilizations, mythologies, religions, designs, motivations. It can all be quite intimidating when having to grind down to think on what the thesis of this monster would be. Such an important figure in the fantasy genre, but beyond that, such an important part of genuine human history. From the oldest of the old all the way to the modern day where we throw a number of rocks at a table to slay them. What is it that makes them so omnipresent to this genre of gaming, or in general fantasy media as a whole? What makes a dragon, and why do we care? By the end of this essay, I hope to give you a better understanding of dragons, and really gift upon you countless ideas for things to do with these Swiss Army knife creatures. Before we keep going on this dragon diatribe, scroll down and leave me a comment telling me about your favorite dragon. Either one you've created, or if you haven't braved this monster in particular at your table, tell me about your favorite fictional dragon. Let's get this journey underway, and we can ask ourselves the cornerstones of a dragon. Something that is almost always present in dragons are two elements, and that's their size and age. I want to throw these two together because they can easily become a bit of an umbrella that is easily explained, but also generally be used as something else to consider if you're wanting to change up the typical dragon formula. You know, the store-bought dragons. We can cook up something better. I believe in you. The best creations will always be the ones we make because of our own contributions to the creative ethos of this hobby. They're the lifeblood of this community. Dragons are typically very big and very old. Easy enough? I would hope so. But let's look at this a bit more. Yes, dragons are big. However, not always true. Plenty of draconic creatures can be human-sized or even car-sized, but then we get dragons like, oh, I don't know, some of the dragons in Middle-earth. Some of those guys make Smaug seem like bite-sized. Not to mention in cases such as Tiamat and Bahamut, these dragons can even be gods, so size can quickly become a relative conversation. The size is often used to really put them in this higher echelon of monster. If you've been around long enough on the channel, you've likely heard me use the term Gigant, which, if this is your first video, welcome. Come check some stuff out. We keep things creative around here. But regardless, a Gigant is a kaiju. Not just a monster, but a giant monster. Creatures that tend to rarely be present, but have the natural importance and presence and power, size, existence to truly define the ecology of an area around them. They are inherently important to the existence of the world because of just how impactful they can be. Dragons should fall into this category. Not every draconic creature can be, but if we're talking about the full-blooded dragons, they need to be. Because if a dragon isn't rare and powerful, it can lose its importance. I feel like we find this reality in Skyrim, a game I adore but can safely say the magic of fighting dragons started to wear down a bit. And what makes these still challenging dragons a big deal? Yes, their size and age. They're the most ancient and dangerous of the creatures. They need to be bigger than big. These creatures make the creation races feel small and insignificant. And as far as age, I hate to keep referencing back to the last video, but we spent time in the Lich video speaking on immortality. And while this conversation refers to more unaging immortality, that's still a relevant conversation. Basic quick review is that there's something to be said about ensuring old creatures feel old. These creatures that have the potential to truly experience the rise and fall of countless civilizations of creation races, whole eras of creation and devastation. Heck, dragons could even be seen at the rise and fall of various gods. Seeing whole religious orders rise from being small cults to perhaps the largest religion in the world. Age alone offers up the absolute storytelling units that dragons can become, and size naturally offers them the presence in the world. When anything can wrestle and toss about with giants, it immediately becomes present and intimidating. I imagine the way that Batman can be paranoid about Superman before they meet and become friends. Or you could world build someone or some organization to have a Cecil Stedman figure who has to prepare for an oncoming threat of dragons, constantly trying to innovate and invent resources to protect the world from the event of such an attack. I think either of those could bring great characters to light as masks or motivations, as to the setting to set the stage for a dynamic relationship with dragons. I think you all pretty well understand that age and size are pretty important to what makes a dragon a dragon. Next, I think it's worth looking at another defining trait for dragon, the destructive engine in their core. Their breath weapon. Most dragons are known for their guttural blast down onto the battlefield. While they have nasty maw of teeth and claws that can render through any armor of man or elf, it is their breath weapon that is seen as their signature move. And I think once again I want to point to Skyrim for my favorite take on the breath weapon. If you've escaped the most re-released game over the past 14 years, let me give you an inside scoop. Whenever a dragon uses its breath in Skyrim, it's typically trying to talk. Dragons can have whole conversations by chatting back and forth, bathing each other in one another's thumes. I think this can work in how we see dragons as a whole, as dragons are these ancient, powerful creatures. Perhaps they have a deeper connection to creation and existence, one not as often felt in a creation race. Most worlds have some starting point or connecting point that tether things together through the weave, a world tree, or whatever your world building alphabet soup might be, but for me it's the world song. I won't go too much into why that is, as I'd like to tackle world creation in another video as a sequel to my first video. However, I think the dragon's most destructive and powerful engine being tethered to the very story of the world might be an interesting thought to process through. They're able to get their souls to sing the thrum of the song of the world itself. Thus, these breath weapons can be feared and misunderstood by some commoners who just hear the tall tales of dragons, but those who are fortunate enough to meet dragons that don't have such a volatile ire or wrath to crush and consume might be blessed in understanding the beautiful music of the sound of a dragon. However, I can say the sappy music approach might not be entirely for everyone, so let's look at this from another angle. Dragons tend to be elemental creatures in some form or fashion, not in the traditional way we make that sound in the sense that there might be a fire or water elemental, but their core. Oftentimes, a gland or organ in their body creates an extract element. It is a tale as old as time. Characters associated with fire having an intense burning personalities. Think of the numerous ways and elements that might be represented in Avatar: The Last Airbender. The way the cultures form, the themes and temperaments associated with them, dragons might be the same. They don't have to be by any means, but allow the elemental mood ring to shine with your dragon, allowing their breaths to be an extension of their personality. The breath weapons is how a dragon can express themselves. It shows the power in their core and the natural status of such an impressive creature. With this element, think too that dragons are creatures that are a part of their environment. I've fallen into a recent rabbit hole as I've been wanting to think more from an ecological angle, so I've been refreshing on some of those basic science skills that the liberal arts majors probably haven't looked at since freshman year of college. I'll save those totally locked in expert skills for another video, but what I've been thinking about recently is that a dragon, the intense apex predator that it is an incredibly elemental being that would terraform its terrain. A fire dragon will raise the natural temperature of the area of its lair, which might be a volcano, so no major changes, but what if a fire dragon puts himself in a thick, lush forest, perhaps in a grassy plains, and now its oppressive heat begins to kill off plants, overheats and kills the insects that can't help break down dead creatures, chases away the primary consumers that don't have wild plants to eat anymore, and the secondary consumers get more desperate and might be motivated to attack the creation races in order to feast. Let your dragon's personality be informed by their environmental attunement. Remember, they're an engine of this element. Lightning? Give them storms. Ice? Freeze everything. What about those fancy dragons that do miscellaneous nonsense, like a slow breath or a confusion breath? Have fun with that. Sincerely. Have a mental fog that can be a byproduct of being around a dragon with a confusion breath. Or if you're feeling really spicy, allow a bit of time distortion. Rapid aging, slow aging, whatever the breath of the dragon does, give it a bit of fun. We would lean out of time travel directly, but time manipulation? Sure. Let's get going on that fun creative impact on the environment. Okay. That's a lot about the body, the existence of a dragon. But what about some of their non-dragon elements? Very often, especially in the TTRPG scene, dragons turn into humans, or at least they have a humanoid form. It can allow them to move throughout the creation race societies without anyone being the wiser of the existence of a dragon. I can see a range of things. Perhaps some people just have them shapeshift into a very standard creation race, some otherworldly, pretty elvish creature, or some folks make a specific draconic humanoid creature for this. This is what Magpie does, by the way. I think this epic-looking dragon creature just transforming down into a regular Joe type of person doesn't do justice to the extent of the dragon's general importance. Dragons are very often full of themselves and see themselves above the other creation races. Lesser creatures, worms in their size. Allow your dragons to have a humanoid form, but really just let the form be distinct. Allow horns, strange bone structure, almost alien-like traits. An amalgamation of unique visual traits. This one isn't the most groundbreaking, merely a recommendation to have a bit of fun with it. Be sure something as common in fantasy as a dragon feels unique and interesting. Give your players something different to see from your dragon. Last but not least, on unique dragon elements, perhaps one of the dragon's secret sauces as far as the TTRPG scene is concerned, that's the dragon's hoard. We have plenty of TTRPG creatures that exist and were made merely for the existence of our shared game community, but as mentioned, dragons are not the same. Dragons are ever-present in human experience. They're around for countless places throughout the world and the expanse of human history. They're oftentimes a bit oppressive with collecting riches and wealth. We'll spend a little bit time talking on the differences between the Eastern and Western dragons because that's an important perspective to keep in mind with any discussion on dragons in a whole. But secondly, we'll also be touching on the difference between the typically metallic and chromatic dragons. Humor me in giving clarity on it in a bit, but it is an important conversation point that, for the interest of the creativity and diversity, I don't have dragons merely aim for gold on a very surface level of wealth. That's not to say that it's bad to have a dragon who hoards treasure, but not every dragon should. The tried and true tropes are there for a reason, and especially if you're playing with new players. I'm always happy to break the norms and do your own thing, but everyone deserves their first dragon to have kidnapped the princess and needs to be rescued. It's sort of a bucket list type of thing. Let's talk more on dragon hoards though. What do they really mean for a dragon? What do they matter to such creatures? And most things with dragons, the everything monster, there is quite a bit of range. Sometimes dragons have a collection of riches and gold because frankly there needs to be a reward for destroying a monster. Which, yeah, I understand. I think rewarding players should be a bit more than just material wealth. And we take a moment here and touch on a dragon in The Witcher. Yes, Witcher's everyone's favorite socially awkward monstrous hunter. They have a bit of a hang-up about killing dragons, because most dragons are intelligent creatures. There are lesser, more bestial dragons, and we'll be looking at that a bit later on too, but they're no different in a lot of ways than humans, but it is man and elf that claims dragons to be monstrous. However, it is mused by Geralt that dragons are made into monsters because man wants the justification to slay them. Justification for man to find the treasures that the dragon keeps close to it. And above many, many other elements of my admittedly limited interactions with the Witcher series, that has always stuck with me. Because let's cut a bit deeper into what's being pointed out here. Dragons are creatures of great intelligence, so what right do we have to hunt and kill them merely for existing? Seek them out for slaying them? That's a bit messed up. The world will always have poachers of creatures that have rare elements or aspects to their bodies, but this is something else. A creature far more developed than merely a simple animal. They have thoughts, wishes, opinions. Their hoard is something of their own creation. What comes to mind is the notion that you are oftentimes grow up thinking your grandparents are loaded because they simply have a good deal of stuff. However, you find out it's because they've lived a longer life and they've just had longer time at the grind. So take the normal human experience and put it on the time scale of a whole dragon. We're talking centuries upon centuries of being able to gather wealth. Even if we had a dragon who used his human form to specialize in certain trade and continue to hone the craft of certain trades. A blacksmith having hundreds of years to sell and improve their product. Let's scale this to the next level of thinking about the fact that they are massive creatures, often with magical abilities, or being outright spellcasters. That amps up the general wealth scale. Now let's see if a dragon wants to be more of a present figure or adventure. We're talking about a dragon taking down bandits, other dragons, dungeon clearing. We've got the ability for dragons to amass incredible wealth and resources. Not every dragon needs to be filthy rich, but if a dragon is remotely interested in the possibility, really take an understanding of how much of an almost trivial task this could be. Perhaps a royal family has bled an incredible wealth to a dragon to act as the city's guardian, protecting it during periods of war or villainy. The scale and potential for a dragon to have a hoard is something that can't be understated. Now, what about alternative ideas? I'll rapid fire you through some of the ones I've played with in previous settings, but admittedly I'll probably change some of these around the next age or era of my setting, which allows me to bring in a Magpie tip that goes underappreciated with world building. Don't ever be afraid to evolve or change elements of your world building. A stagnant world can stifle creativity. Change something up and see what new opportunities exist. We'll take a run through of chromatic dragons first. Let's start hot and fiery with the red dragons. They do often hoard gold due to their own anger and hatred towards gold dragons. The heroic and almost divine nature of their rivals has caused them to hate the sight of seeing it so sought after in the society of the lesser creatures. I wanted red dragons, who are often seen as the typical fantasy dragon, to also hoard the most typical item, raw wealth. They also probably steal away virgin nobles or whatever other dramatic story you want your selfish evil dragons to take away. White dragons love their hoards of water. Now water, where's the fun in that? What do they do with that? Well, I tend to like making creatures that might be a bit sadistic in weird flexes. White dragons freeze whole rivers with their mighty breath and will carry them away to add them to their hoard. They also get some of the most out of terraforming areas with great heat. With ice. Their breath has an additional effect of the status of creating what is known as never melt ice. I won't pretend the name's original. If you know, but the name is correct. They want to dehydrate their victims, ruin the ecosystem, and generally be menaces. Little Magpie fun fact. If we're looking at the basic D&D designs, black dragons are by leagues ahead of the rest. They're my absolute favorites. They're powerful, menacing, I love them to death. So, what does my favorite dragon accomplish with their hoard? They enjoy the crunch crunch of the bones and bodies filling the swamps they inhabit, so they can hear the music of the dead and defeated underneath every footstep. Blue dragons have always been magical dragons for me. Blue dragons hunger for the humming purr of the magical items in their hoard, studying the research and secrets of the magical world, and being brought comfort by it. Green dragons, as often as they are, tend to be creatures of secrets. Green dragons are most often found in society sneaking around of the chromatic dragons. Their horde is empowered and grows as they have more and more resources, secrets, connections, and social power. It is something they can often be hard to truly understand or see the scale of, but to the dragon of choice, they have the exact sensibilities to be presently aware of horde. Sometimes the dragon just has the supernatural ability to always know where their horde is. Sometimes it can tell you the precise gold count in its horde, down to the very last tarnished piece of gold. Once again, keep these in mind should you be able to do things that feel larger than life. That wraps up chromatic dragons, so how about we talk about metallic? Maybe I can save you all a bit of time and rapid fire through these. Brass dragons see their hordes as the territory that they watch over, as the guardians ensuring no harm comes to the subjects of their lands, but also ensuring the land itself remains healthy. The bronze dragon understands its horde to be the stories and scars of the great battles it has endured, being able to eagerly recall each and every wound and memorable enemy that has dealt it a mighty blow. Copper dragons are often creators, something as old and as wise as a dragon, as either an inventor or artisan, would be certainly something to behold. Their horde being the vast swaths of passion projects or improvements they've made to various items. Perhaps you can have them be secretive and obsessive, having created wonders that could push the world to the next great age of existence, but it is kept away as the dragon doesn't want to share its creations. Gold dragons are, in a lot of a sense, the most regal and above others, but not always in conceited ways. They want the kingdoms that they live inside and influence to thrive, and they feel a sense of accomplishment with such success. They don't directly need to be deified, but they're also not against it as a concept. Lastly, if black dragons are my favorite of the chromatics, who's my favorite of the metallics? Has to be silver dragons. And what do they hoard? Well, the best friend-shaped dragon do just that. They hoard the greatest reward we all want by the end of an adventure, the friends we made along the way. These dragons have an absolute fixation with the smaller creation races, being fascinated by the traveling, adventuring, and talking with these other creatures, oftentimes enjoying hearing the stories themselves as they travel throughout the world. I don't know if you're able to clearly tell, but more often than not, a lot of TTRPGs, chromatic bad, metallic good. It's tried and true, and frankly, you can shake it up for your world building by just changing any or all of the elements up. Everyone expects the big fire-breathing red dragon to be a monstrous villain of the story, but what if as the enemy army invades, almost overwhelming the hero's kingdom, as the large shadow covers the kingdom's skies and fire rains down from it? You realize the hot inferno of death is not yours to worry about, but the enemies, and the scaly fire that is, in fact, the cavalry. All of these previous mentioned hordes are ones that I admittedly created years ago. I've broken some of the rules, kept some of the other rules. It's an ever-changing and growing concept. Just as the great D&D player Heraclitus said, the only consistent in world building is change, or something like that. Now let's take a moment and look at some of the general types of dragons. As mentioned before, chromatic, bad, metallic, good. That is the very simplified version of dragons that a lot of fantasy TTRPGs lean on. But where does that get us? Well, to refer back to the trope talks, if we're looking at the real world history, we can see a clear line of difference in how the Eastern world and how the Western world sees dragons. I think there's a quote in Legendary Godzilla's King of the Monsters that generally summarizes the mentality. It is an exchange between two characters. One is asking the other about any tips on slaying dragons, and the response is given. Slaying dragons is a Western concept. In the East, they are sacred, divine creatures who brought wisdom, strength, even redemption. If you see metallic and chromatic in these very separated groups, I think it will be easy enough for you to understand the difference between Eastern and Western dragons. The East, they are revered dragons, oftentimes seen as higher beings, guardians, protectors, and in the West, they're where princesses being kidnapped, portals to hell being the mouth of a dragon, so on and so forth. These are relatively well-known concepts, so I don't feel the need to beat the dead horse here. The dragon that's waiting in the cake we're already going to eat to celebrate Monster Week is pretty hungry and in need of a snack, so I want you to understand, either good or bad, protector or destroyer, dragons are almost never rank and file. There's something of natural greatness and the power with the presence of a dragon. I think another dragon can well describe this with its card text. Yes? If you had Magpie Talks About Yu-Gi-Oh! On your video essay bingo card, go ahead and check it off, because we're going to look at Blue Eyes White Dragon. One of, if not the most iconic dragons, if not just in Yu-Gi-Oh! Card games, but I dare say even anime. This mighty beast is known by a whole generation for being Seto Kaiba's signature card. Back in the day when Yu-Gi-Oh! Used to release these cards that mentioned known as normal monsters, they didn't have effects, so we got this cool flavor text along with the art and stats. And what does the Blue Eyes White Dragon have in its text? This legendary dragon is a powerful engine of destruction, virtually invincible. Very few have faced this awesome creature and lived to tell the tale. Don't you think that well gets across the story, the experience of what it should feel like to face down a proper dragon? We ain't talking crawling dragon or baby dragon in here, we're talking about the dragon. This speaks to what I want the thesis to be, and I'll go ahead and give you a preview to that. Dragons can be everything. That's something quite evident from the Trope talks that I have mentioned, and likely something that numerous wonderful other content creators would talk about in this Monster Week. However, let me go beyond that thesis. Give you something Magpie original to take home to impress your friends with. Dragons are power. Yes, they aren't just powerful and dangerous, they are power incarnate. Destruction on the scale that only our imaginations can begin to comprehend. They are the human response to the desire to want to understand and materialize something greater than the real world. Dragons are everywhere. History, folklore, games, books, movies. They're as old as dirt, but let's do our Magpie's usual dance. Strut through some fictional examples in order to better think on some of the elements and get a scale that famous dragons get used for. I don't plan on dwelling on any of these for too long, as I would hope more often these examples will be better known. Let's start with one that's been talked about in length on this channel, and suffice to say, I'm not even close to saying everything I would want to say about him. King Ghidorah. Yes, Monster Zero is in fact a dragon, and as mentioned in my Aberrations Reimagined video, he shows the cosmic power of the horrors from the deep space. I could easily see a world where you could take King Ghidorah and make him a Galactus-like opponent who is coming to end the world as we know it. Or take the Magpie original and put him in your world history as the monster that was destroyed and all other aberrations grow and evolve from. Either way, the most famous kaiju dragon offers us a scope on their size. There are likely bigger dragons out there, but he will show you that you can have dragons so large and in charge that it takes a whole team of giant monsters just to oppose him. Shenron would be my next example, as that's because I think he's a very good representation of what you can do to use a dragon as a higher being. Ones that are cosmologically more than just mere powerful creatures, but able to change and impact the world on a much larger scale. A wish-granting dragon isn't even that far-fetched, because realistically most D&D dragons love to make them natural spellcasters, so a wish spell could be something that they'd try and attain. Magpie opinion on all dragons are sorcerers? I don't think it's the most creative fun to give any race, species, or creature a type blanket terms and conditions. I think it makes it too much of an approachable encounter. I would never really want my parties to know exactly whether they're getting into a fight with a dragon unless it's a good bit of research is done or other information is provided to them. These are creatures of myth and legend, so let there be outlandish stories out there on what dragons could do. I actually think that's another recommendation I'd give you about general use of powerful or legendary creatures in TTRPGs. Even if you don't have an established truth of the creature being true for your type of monster in your world, let that be an easy rumor or conspiracy fodder for NPCs in your world to talk about. If dragons are known for hoarding treasures of gold, and perhaps they started that rumor in order to conceal the fact that they enjoy hoarding strange baubles or toys. Back to Shenron. Like I said, allow dragons to be important. You can have whole campaigns, whole factions be interested in attaining the rituals to call upon a dragon of great power. Perhaps a legendary dragon that can be summoned by the rites of heroic feats, and the king beckons the heroes to attempt to summon the dragon to be their deliverance from a war against their enemy. From there, you can ask yourself to think from this dragon's perspective. Is it Shenron? Is it indifferent and beholden to the wishes of whatever summoned it? Or maybe they're a bit more like Omega Shenron, woken from an ancient slumber and pissed off at everyone about it. For the record, not 110% certain on my Omega Shenron lore, so some details might be fuzzy. However, I might honestly just want you you to think of the fact that not all powerful beings are going to be happy about being disturbed. Or perhaps they were sealed away for a reason, and any story you can think of a dragon as a savior can easily be flipped to leave them as the position of the destroyer. Speaking of narratively duelist dragons, let's take a look at the Brothers of Skyrim, Paarthurnax and Alduin. Yes, the World Eater and his treacherous brother. They offer some interesting elements, such as the previously mentioned theme of a dragon being the two dragons talking to one another, which is still a really cool thing to explore in a setting where interacting with numerous dragons might be an ideal situation. However, they offer some other inspiration that I want you to all think on. Not only the dragon that flies higher than the rest, the all-powerful boss dragon who coordinates the other dragons, but also the follow-up with the completed dominion of the world under the subjugation of dragons. What's that? Oh, yeah. Another recommendation of a story or inspiration where Magpie tells you to end the world. Yeah, I know. Back to the brothers. I think there's a reasonable amount that can be gathered from the thought that there can be an evil dragon who becomes a good guy. There's 2 points I could make off of this. Firstly, I mentioned on Blue Sky not too long ago that I love pulling inspiration from folks. Random story bits or even world-building fun facts about other worlds can give me a whole wealth of inspiration. A reply was given that really stuck with me. If an angel can fall, can a demon rise? And the short and dirty response for my world is yes. You see, the same story happens with Paarthurnax. He was once at Alduin's side, but now he helps the hero of the story, the Dovahkiin, in taking down his brother, the Great World Eater. Dragons can be creatures of change. Dragons can be used as good moral experiments for players because so often we expect dragons to be absolute paragons of power in whatever way their default settings are set to. So often the tyrannical fiery red dragon is a villain, a terror before the party, but what if he can be redeemed? What if he can learn? What if the sanctuary guardian, who has served generations as a guardian, is frustrated and tired of serving, and has turned to want to rule and be worshipped like the god he swore to protect? You think you can see how easy it is to look at a dragon in fiction and instantly find that inspiration? Sincerely, I think this video could be indefinitely longer if I wanted to bring up more and more examples of creative ideas that could be extrapolated from fictional dragons. When this video was originally aimed to be March of the Dragons, I wanted to do daily videos or shorts for this channel talking about different dragons to create for each TTRPG setting. I can keep cooking, so if you're interested in more and more dragons, please let me know in the comments. Maybe I can find some time, get some dragons back in the kitchen. I think we've spent a good bit of time really digesting the concept of dragons, their typical traits, and what we often see their roles being. However, let's take a look at their function and where we need them for our TTRPG games. If we're talking about world building, there's one of 2 clear overarching paths that can be taken. You can either look at dragons under the same lens that we did for liches in the last video. You make them as rare as they can be. They're legendary, and meeting one in person is a once in every few generations event, not just a happenstance or easy enough accident, or alternatively, they can be a very real and present part of the world. There's numerous stories in fiction where dragons are the main driving force of the greater world. I've recently been listening to the audiobook for Priory of the Orange Tree, and dragons in that book pretty much are the cornerstone for the protagonist's end of the world and the antagonistic forces that are threatening to end said world. Or we can peek back on the previously mentioned Skyrim. Dragons were never around until they all of a sudden were, and it became a very big problem. That being said, that's why we don't hit the snooze on world-ending threats. Either way, you can go with Mythic and Legendary and have them really have this grandiose encounter, or you allow the chance to have dragons get the spotlight so many other franchises have given them. Now, it's your turn. Dragons can define a world if you like, and there's no problem with that, but foundationally decide how common do you want them to be. That should set the next steps of determining how you can really make dragons all your own, or even if you use store-bought dragons, which no shame in that, how you fit them into your world. Now that you're thinking about dragons in the context of how they impact your world, let's talk about the fact of range of roles that they can fill. One such that I'd like to start with is the higher beings. Dragons are naturally elevated beyond being seen as another mindless beast or even a creature that's seen on the same level as a dwarf or a human. They're a few steps above in the staircase of superiority. So what's the top of the ceiling looking like for a dragon? I mean, sincerely, you can use dragons for anything, but don't let them lose their identity of what it means to be a dragon. If they're a god, maybe their followers have to help enlarge their horde in some form or fashion. Dragons could easily be themed and transformed into fiends, constructs, celestials. It's all about crossing the streams here. Maybe a fiend dragon's breath weapon is the souls of the damned that have been convicted to the afterlife for the pain and suffering they unleashed on the dragon kind. Or the breath weapon of a celestial dragon heals. When you're washed in the breath weapon, you hear the humming of singing angels in the distance as your body feels more rested and relaxed than you've felt in years. What can dragons be in your eyes? You ever cooked up your own homebrew dragon? Maybe a plant dragon or an undead dragon? Tell me about them. You can sometimes offer worlds of inspiration in simple comments. The next one should seem a pretty natural subject to tackle when discussing the greatness of dragons. Dragons as your big bad evil guys. The villain of your campaign, or maybe even the villain of an adventure in your campaign. This should be an easy fit. I mean, we've seen it with the Chroma Conclave, but remember what I said in Liches. Be careful about putting the prideful and arrogant together. Least they collapse in on each other. Unless, of course, that's the story your party might generally like doing. And then knock yourself out. Put a bunch of your problematic faves in dragon form in a cave and see who walks out alive. But making a dragon your villain otherwise can come naturally. They're big, powerful, resourceful. It isn't the hardest part to get to understand, so I want to dwell on is a tried and true trope that I feel goes underappreciated. As mentioned, dragons stealing maidens away to a castle and a group of heroes needing to go rescue them. Is it basic fantasy? Yes. However, there's countless twists that could be brought in. Maybe the dragon is being mind-controlled and influenced. Maybe the royal kidnapped is actually in league with the dragon and the two strive to overthrow the kingdom for themselves. Or we just let it play out straight, and you get to live out your Shrek fantasies at the TTRPG table. There's nothing wrong with a dragon being a rung on the ladder in the right story. A dragon doesn't always have to be the villain in a heroic journey. A dragon can be a villain. Big, important, powerful, but there can always be a bigger fish. Another element to touch on is not all dragons are evil, or even the evil ones might not be wanting to conquer the world or destroy the kingdom. Perhaps the dragons are just NPCs in your story, and what do we do with them there? Well, that should be understood with the continual themes and importance. Dragons help establish a very clear bar for magical fantasy in the world. They can heighten a low magic to be awe-inspiring moment in a character's life they'll never forget. In higher magic, they might not be unheard of, but there's still something about an encounter with something that you have to crane your neck back to be able to look up at. Something that can destroy you with breath from its lungs. Dragons can be pretty cool if you let them be. Let's look at what we can really do with them as NPCs. There's the mentor role, perhaps a distant priest in a church in the mountains of a god of the party's cleric or paladin. Some relationships like Parthenax with the Greybeards in Skyrim. Or maybe he's a guardian to the kingdom that the party works as part of the adventuring guild for. Celebration and reverence paid to give them protection against other apex predators or even political enemies. That might bring armies down upon the kingdom. Dragons are hard to be seen as passive. Stories that have dragon encounters immediately pump the brakes and give the, oh man, this must be important. What comes to mind is Caldaris in Fields of Mystria. He's even a sick dragon, and you still get the sense from the little we know about him that he's important. Dragons can be anything. I know this is the theme we keep revisiting, but it's really important with dragons. But to prove my point, let me take a dragon out of the element of importance. What if we took them out of their natural state of opulence and power? What if a dragon is the humble but wise storekeeper the party always graciously has gotten supplies from? Perhaps he's hidden away from an enemy that has targeted him and seeks to hunt him down, so he must stay in human form. Then there's the dragon who was once accosted a farm, sweeping past the field, snagging a cow or two for a snack. But after a death-defying battle with an archmage, the dragon suffered an injury that took its wings away, crashing into the village on death's door. After the villagers did their best to attend to his wounds and help them get back on their feet, they told the dragon if he wanted to repay the debt, he could work a job in the town. Maybe now he's a farmer who must chase off the wolves with his mighty roar. Maybe he uses his massive claws to till the fields of crops. A dragon who's lived generations in isolation has grown stir-crazed and decided that it wants to live among its creation races, enjoy the excitement and chaos of their fleeting and eventful lives, perhaps pursuing being a guard captain in a nearby city to be involved in danger, intrigue, and drama. To be the best of his knowledge could never threaten his actual safety and well-being. Take any typical job or character class and make it a dragon and let your brain ignite with creativity. Hunters, sailors, blacksmiths. Imagine being lost looking for directions and you come across a dragon in the forest that is hunting prey for the nearby village. Or the epic feeling of a party member wielding a blade that was crafted in the forge lit by a dragon's fire. A jailer, mercenary, or page, what did you have to do to go to prison that is dutifully guarded by a dragon? Or how badly did you mess up that someone has paid a dragon to come and find you? Dragons can be anywhere, my dear adventurers, so be very careful about who you might try and murder homo. And for my dearest game masters out there, remember, there's no saying an NPC couldn't be a dragon, accidentally become a dragon all of a sudden. Now, situation and morality are all to be generally cautious with, but the dragon button is always there. That's enough time with the dragons as characters in the story. Now, what about dragons as the plot? We've talked about the kidnap the princess, save the princess plot, but what often comes with that? Well, the board tries to seduce the dragon, don't they? But don't worry, I'm not going to write it off as another comment for your D&D bingo cards. What does Magpie say about romancing the dragons? Let him. Don't let them cower out of it either. They're ancient and mighty creatures, but they still have hearts. Pretty sure those are used as ingredients in certain potions or magical items. Dang, I just realized, what do you do with the dragon once they're dead? Could have been a whole other section, but alas, I'll just have to hope one of the other creators covers such an intriguing topic. I guess I digress. Dragons can be very romanceable. I mean, honestly, it is something that can happen in a party. Something I've seen happen in a party that I was a player in. Dragon had some magically induced brain trauma, and once they were all fixed up and transforming back into their human-like woman form that they were, the druid caught some feelings. It can be quite charming, just don't let it be game-breaking. Don't feel the need to have the dragon go adventuring with them. Give them a reason that they realistically can't, or not until the party is at the level where standing shoulder to shoulder with a dragon's a fair fight. There's a world building tip I've danced around a few times, mentioned on Blue Sky, and it's one that I feel pretty good about. If you feel writer's block, any creative struggle where to take a setting, or if you're feeling a world is growing stagnant, end the world. Or at least present a world-ending apocalyptic threat and see where the world reacts. Even if it isn't the premise for a campaign, it could be a generally nice second season to a campaign, or a one-shot, or what if. I mean, there's a lot you can do with ending the world, and why am I talking about this? Okay. Thanks for making me just spell it out, but dragons are the perfect creature to end the world. Maybe a great awakening happens, and all the dragons that were resting, asleep for hundreds of years, waiting for that exact moment where they were called upon to take the skies, and raining death upon the creation races that have ruled the world in complacency for far too long. One dragon can fight an army, so what does an army of dragons carving their way throughout the world look like? They'd probably need some dragon above all other dragons to kind of keep sense and order, but you'd have the possibility of dragons establishing the New World Order, threatening the existence of the gods as their followers are eradicated church by church. They just naturally have the ability to be powerful engines of destruction. Let them be that. However, you can also work in the inverse of that. Make dragons not exist. I mean, they'll be coming up because this is a whole video about using dragons, but build your world to talk about them as if they were extinct, or perhaps outright fictitious, until your party goes chasing some bandits into a cave, and then the deepest parts of the cave comes a fiery, burning expanse, a breath weapon that turns the bandits to ash and gives your party a new perception of their position on the pecking order. Put time and effort into describing the armor-like scales, the titanic size of their massive wings, and the winds that come from the beating of said wings. The limbs and tails that topple trees with ease. My last plot point is a bit of a Magpie tested tried and true. Sit for a spell as I tell you the story of when the dragons and giants teamed up to try and end the world. Yes, the tip I was throwing around earlier is in fact been a main factor in my second campaign's climactic final arc. The creation races had a dragon on their side, Authadane, the arcane storm. one of the most powerful mages to ever exist, and he was quite angry with the arrogance of his dragon brethren. So he did the impossible. He cast an 11th level spell. In my world, for quick world building, everyone with the powerful enough soul can create one 10th level spell that is wholly unique to them. Marshals have their own souls and essence to do similar powerful features and attacks, but the step beyond is altering reality itself, changing the fundamentals of everything going forward. It is one step under some of the magic of the gods, but in some ways, it is also beyond the magic of the gods, as not even they can undo an 11th level spell. Arthedain never wanted all of the creation races to end by the hands of the dragons again, so he would ensure that the chance to be afflicted with an illness that would eradicate their minds, making them nothing more than beasts, no different than the wild animals that nature might produce. That being said, even the dragon sickness affecting them didn't change their physical might. They were still quite dangerous, just easier to trick with traps, or even perhaps some poisons if you get something spicy enough to contest a dragon's fortitude. With this, you open up a large swath of plots to run around. Dragons that were once mindful and present in body and spirit growing sick, paranoid, and scrambling to find a cure. Perhaps you can also have random encounters with young dragons that are far more smash and grab, giving the excuse to let players fight dragons without worrying about the fact that these ancient creatures would typically be cunning and careful. That's plenty of different plots and plans for stories you can begin to think about for your dragons. Now, what if we wanted to put our own Magpie original twists on them? Well, it's a bit more of a challenge, as dragons are the creatures, so in many ways they're fairly well explored. However, I've never been a bird short on an idea or a few. Let's start them off. Take away the concept of elemental dragons. I'm not saying that you don't have to have them, but think of dragons as avatars of an element of destruction. But what if dragons cause natural disasters? Dragons burrowing causes earthquakes, not those silly tectonic plates. An angry dragon beating its wings in the sky creates tornadoes. Dragons swimming can torrent up tsunamis and hurricanes. You get the point. This likely sets up the stakes for some dragons needing them to be bigger in some instances and possibly more dangerous than the rules as written. But I think it could be really help give me some ideas for something new and fresh to do. Perhaps a group of heroes wanted to go out and exterminate these natural disasters, not realizing the functions that their existences do have to the environments of creation. What next do we do with them? Well, let me just say, welcome to Jurassic Park. So hear me out, because this one is not only straightforward, but also segues us to the next idea. I think dinosaurs in TTRPG worlds is one of the great three. Guns, dinosaurs, and homebrew content not created by the DM himself. The horsemen of world-building apocalypse. But what if you didn't look at dinosaurs as we knew them back during Jurassic Park movies, or even if we understand them now to be more related to our avian friends like yours truly, but instead a species of dragons that never took flight, perhaps more physically diverse, taking the land and seas to express further variety. Maybe you have wyverns or the Drake Guardians, but you want them a bit more flavorful, a bit more variety. Look into having some velociraptors or even a triceratops. Yes, you want to think about diet, and you can think on what it means for these creatures to be running around, but everyone wants to polymorph into a T-Rex. But how about we make it the king of the dinosaurs, really fit into the world? I think you can have a lot of fun with all the different types of dinosaurs and think about them as dragons and transforming them in a dragon lens. You could still have your savage land where Sauron rules supreme with the exclusive dominion over the sacred land where these legendary creatures are only found. But as it's pointed out in my previous portions of this essay, break the rules. What if your dragon Pterodactyl Man wants to conquer the world, so he begins to invade kingdoms with the strange wingless dragons, colossal and abnormal to even the most experienced and capable monster hunters? How does that transition into our next idea? Well, let dragons be birds. Yes, you might see the natural connectivity through my own majestic magnificence, the similarities that magpies have to collecting items that might be perceived as a dragon's hoard, and if you do, I'm quite certain you're the smart one of your party. Magpies aren't the only birds with some personality. You avid followers of mine know that this magpie's household has a few other feathered friends. Howlet, our pigeon, carries himself with the confidence of a dragon, and his constant mooing would bring all of the maidens to the kingdom. Jokes aside, pigeons can be goofy little guys. skies. They either see you as a mate or you're part of the family. They play in roughhouse with you. And take that, put it on the size of a dragon, and you've got one-of-a-kind experience. Imagine a dragon that tries to romance and flirt, not with outright mating and conquest in its mind, but just out of the self-fulfilling validation of having all of the ladies want them. Additionally, a dragon that might roughhouse is generally a terrifying concept as it is adorable. All that being said, pigeons, not known for their intellect. Howlet is very, very cute, but he's also a bit of an idiot. So don't have your cunning dragons be pidgeons. So what other feathers do we have in the house? 2 ducklings, who are the hardened criminals, fraud and perjury. These 2 princeling criminals are just about every bit of personality that you'd want out of a dragon who might huff and puff, but also run away the second anything advances upon them. However, there is nothing they are more ferocious with than their food. A violent and merciless display that might unsettle any adventurer as hundreds of pounds of food is violently thrown about. I'm not kidding, you ever see some ducks go after some peas? Look it up after this video, or pause my video, open another tab, give it a watch. Now, imagine a dopey dragon, a village with numerous crops having brought an offering to the dragon for protection and having such a relationship with his food. On top of that, if you've never lived or been around ducks, as I'm suspecting most of you have not, ducks are not sweet, quiet creatures. They're sensory overload on a good day, and the mighty roar of a dragon becoming a bit more of a bratty whine to scare off predators and let them know how totally in charge and needy they are, Duckagons would need to replicate their namesake and likely be perceived as more dangerous than they actually are. I mean, we're talking about dragons, so I don't want them to be chump change, but they're also ducks, not creatures legendary in their battle prowess and might. But not all birds are so cute and gentle, right? Think about the whole animal kingdom when it comes to the skies. Vultures, a dragon that might feed on the corpses of mighty monsters and the reason the world's never seen what the corpse of a purple worm looks like, or what feeds on other slain dragons to dispose of their bodies. Hawks in every shape and size are terrifying creatures with the way that they can make a breakneck dive, and imagine the dragon doing that to a castle. The wizard's spells do them no good as hundreds of pounds of stone come crashing down upon them as their own wizard's tower is now pinning them. Let's go beyond this line now. Plus ultra. What about the quick head turns that many birds do? Their exceptional eyesight and perception. The way they walk, bring the animation to your dragons to bring unique life into them. Them moving like birds can easily become a defining trait even if you don't buy into the various other types of original dragon concepts. But maybe also consider binding the two. A black dragon's already typically obsessed with death. Why not make it a vulture in nature? Look up nature documentaries and breathe life into your dragons. Just like the unlife said dragon is about to breathe onto your party. But also think some other bird fundamentals, and birds tend to have very specific mating dances and rituals. Perhaps the dragon is seeking a mate and asks for the party's help in completing the perfect display of his strengths, scales, and wings throughout this ritual and dance. And many birds mate for life, picking one partner and staying with them forever, and think about what that means for something as old and powerful as a dragon. Imagine the tragic romance if a dragon's partner is hunted or slain. Imagine if the party is the ones that killed their spouse for nothing but a king who wanted the gold. What if the dragon falls in love with one of the party members and is now difficult conversations of mortality and life expectancy come into play. The dragon begins to think of ways of ensuring an eternity with their mortal mate, and that leads them to seek out the path of lichdom. This is almost never-ending area of inspiration. Thinking of the unsettling mimicry that birds are often capable of, imagine the thunderous thrum of a dragon's vocal range could be capable of mimicking. The screams of one of the party members, the tearing and destruction of a wall, alarming precision that can very easily disorient the players. What about the nests? Yes, we've spent a good time talking about hordes earlier, but birds make nests of various degrees of quality, and that gives the variety of players to learn the type of dragon based on researching and the tendency to seek out certain types of items for their nests. On top of that, think on some of the variety of designs on birds out there. We've all seen D&D's dragons and used them as assumed default dragon designs, and that's all well and good, but look at some of the gorgeous plumage on birds, the crowns and colors of their feather bodies. Look at Howlet and how pretty he is. Now imagine a dragon that pretty. Actually, please let me know how much you all like this thought in particular, because I'm having fun thinking of all of these and the types of dragons that might be inspired by them, whether it be the natural disasters or the birds. I could do something more specific in depth, might be a fun break from the longer form content. But let me know in the comments section what you think. Let me take a minute and do a rapid fire through a few IPs that have many dragons, some of my favorite dragons in fact, and both of them have gotten their mentions previously in this essay, so no need to spend time introducing them, let's just jump on in. With Pokemon, one of my favorite elements of the dragons is the diversity. The story and general ecology of their world set up to see dragons that are small little guys in apples, mailman dragons that sometimes hyperbeam criminals in the underground basements, grandpas, like gentle dragons filled with soft warmness, and even sky lords on the level of the same creatures that control space, time, and distortion. Dragons are everywhere in Pokemon, and I feel like they even help push the same thesis. Dragons define the fantasy of power. They show what the fantastical creatures are, and then show the same level above them. If you look at Pokemon in the term pseudo-legendary, defining typically one of the most, if not the most, powerful line of Pokemon in a generation, and so often these creatures are dragons. They are introduced to the fairy type just to counteract the dominance that dragons had. Lance, the first champion in Pokemon, dragon Pokemon. Cynthia, one of the most famously difficult Pokemon champions, is Ace Monster, dragon. Charizard, the most famous Pokemon barring maybe Pikachu, gets every special form that Nintendo will ever come out. So help Nintendo. Basically, in every way but type, dragon. And even his Mega Evolutions address this by making him a dragon. Pokemon gives us numerous angles, but what's there to really take away outside of what I've already talked about? Firstly, give diverse mundanity to dragons, if that's the world you want to build. We talked about this in some of the jobs earlier, but really spend some time mulling it over. Pokemon has dragons whose whole thing is basically just being a grandpa to Pokemon and people, and not even the get off my lawn grandpa, but like the non-problematic type of grandpa. Drampa is a sweet, sweet old dragon grandpa, but also maybe something to explore, and I like that Fairy takes dragon types at the knees. Elemental interaction and weakness is something to explore more in depth, but if there was a type of magic that just does tons of damage to dragons, that would be cool. The next IP? Yeah, no surprise. We've talked about it a few times. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has lots of dragons. 2/3 of the signature monsters in the first series are dragons. All of the main monsters in 5Ds are dragons. The D in 5Ds is dragons. Winged Dragon of Ra, Slifer the Sky Dragon are 2 of 3 Egyptian gods. Dragons are pretty much right there, right everywhere in Yu-Gi-Oh! Oh, you're wondering how they prove the thesis. You know Dark Arm Dragon, the guy who made so many people leave Yu-Gi-Oh! Because of how oppressive a card he was back in the day? Dragons are often the meta-defining deck in one way or another. Even right now, Blue Eyes, with its new structure deck, has breathed fresh white lightning on the forefront of the meta, making an affordable, approachable deck for people to try out. I love this structure deck. I will make the guys I play TCGs with quite tired of this structure deck, until it gets hit by the ban list, if it ever does. But do you know how insane it would be for Konami to have to hit a Blue Eyes White Dragon card on the ban list? I will say, on talking on Yu-Gi-Oh! I had big ambitions of making a mini campaign setting with the Blue Eyes, or Eyes of Blue, as the main inspiration, but it has evolved into something. I want to spend a bit more time to develop with some adventures and other nonsense, so if you're interested in what this brain cooks up with a lot of nonsense I talk in these videos, hit that subscribe button, stick around. Don't know when it'll be made, but I'm excited about it. While you're hitting the subscribe button, go ahead and throw this video a like if you've enjoyed it. Small channel, so every single action for the algorithm is worth 1,000 thank yous. We've set the stage for all the fundamentals of Dragon, their use in character and plot, as well as numerous alternatives and places of inspiration. However, this leaves us at quite the junction. What do we do with them? How do you Dragon? Let's cover our routine sources to give you guys places to deep dive after finishing the video. Welsh DM, as he often does, has a video I can plug here with his bestiary on dragons, doing an excellent job talking on how to use their size and natures in actions. Another favorite is to push Keith Amon's The Monsters Know What They're Doing. He has 22 pages dedicated to the different types of dragons you might run into. And while I would like to spend time deep diving on both of those sources to share the wealth of wisdom in both of them, let me advise this script is quickly racing to beat out the word count of Keith Amon's book has on dragons. Actually, I might have already. I don't know. I've mostly been wanting to not hold you all hostage any more than I already need to, so what does Magpie have to say on using dragons? Remember, size matters. These are colossal creatures, larger than life. They're draconic creatures that are to be dog-sized, car-sized, and mountain-sized, but most of what we're talking about, the mighty dragons that we're all here on Monster Week celebrating, are the big boys. And make sure that matters. Let them throw around chunks of buildings, put civilians in dangers with crumbling structures, or environmental damage from their breath weapons. They are old and wise. These dragons know what they're doing. They'll fight smart. They'll take the advantage of the environment and the weaknesses of the party. Anything that they can think of. And here's the nasty secret. Cunning dragon that isn't bought into fighting the party as equals has every right to grab a party member, fly them up, and drop them. Yes, sometimes this isn't fun, but maybe let it be a skill challenge. How does the party interact with it? You don't have to play everything by the book's rules as written. We all know that no one does it that way anyways. Let the wizard cast a spell as a reaction to catch him, or the barbarian who is about to be dropped grapples the claws of the creature, deciding to not let go. If the dragon is willing to pull out all the dirty tricks in the book, the players should too. And oftentimes, the players naturally already are, because they're dealing with a whole dragon, and they're all little squishies. Those are my two biggest tips in things I often see missed with dragons in combat. Even the big brutish dragon has the sensibilities of survival and whatever it takes. Brutes often spend most of their time fighting, so they should be more reliable savage fighters, and their size makes the difference. I know a lot of times we throw extra damage die at a creature, wave our hand, and just say, see, it's so much bigger, but paint the picture, tell the story. Break the scenery. The last portion is admittedly not the most dragon-oriented, but was requested from a fan of the channel. However, with how universal dragons are, I wanted to include some universal advice you can take away from this Monster Week. Even if you don't like dragons, or any of the countless suggestions that I've made for them, you still have some new information to mull over, and that's the structure of stories. There's a lot of issues and elements with pacing and other elements of planning that can really bite you in the butt if you overcompensate one way or another. Let me start off this section by advising that Fantasy Forge has a great series of videos on planning the first, second, and third act of a campaign. A 3-act structure is pretty tried and true for a lot of folks, so don't ever be afraid about learning and leaning on the classics. Let's think on story type for a bit. Okay, so among most of my friends, I'm the heroic fantasy guy. I love the zero to hero, the epic fantasy of facing impossible odds to fight off the unbeatable evil. These types of stories will always be a small gaggle of village knights sees their village burned down by a dragon. There are a few survivors and now they must piece their lives back together and all come to the realization that they want to kill this great ancient dragon. Through the path of vengeance, they realize that other impacts the dragon has made and the other evils of the world, and the emotions go from hatred and anger to resolve and empowered protection. But even if I'm the DM, it isn't all about the types of stories that I want to run exclusively. In the duet I run for Magwife, we had a whole session that was her character, Princess Marietta, holding interviews for her castle's new head chef/baker. It isn't my idea of heroic adventures, but it was still very fun. It's all about what you reach as a fun mix to keep folks happy. Remember when I was talking about campaign prep? Really hone in on that main thing. Now, if you're having trouble really understanding the scope of things, let me ask you to partake in this little bit of conversation. If you were pitching the story to be adapted into anything, a movie, would it be a movie or a TV show? A series of books or a standalone novel? If the answer is a short book or a movie, maybe think of your campaign and structure it on a one-shot. Or what I've learned is far more common reality because typically it's going to be a 3-shot or a mini-series. I digress. The wonderful thing about these stories is that they are naturally going to be a bit more fluid since they're being created live in real time. If you realize that your great evil lad isn't as all-powerful and unstoppable, okay, maybe that's just Season 1's villain. Maybe make sure the party doesn't kill him. Your party would absolutely lose it if he comes back in Season 4 as an unlikely ally of sort. What about the longer end? Well, some people start campaigns with a goal in mind, Do they want to go from level 1 to 20? Do you want to kill a god? Yes, I know. You JRPG fanatics out there see the conclusions of a lot of stories being the actual boxing match with the deity or perhaps deity-killing creature of impossible power. If things lean to the series of books, seasons of a show, or whatever lengthy narrative method you might need to deal with, just keep in mind it's a marathon, not a sprint. Let there be stepping stone opponents for the party to engage with and overcome. Keep the great evil lad out in the distance. If we're talking about dragons, think about how often Alduin shows up in Skyrim, but he sort of ditches you and just goes off to do Alduin things and just makes you fight some other jobber dragon. The goalpost shouldn't be reachable, but you should be able to keep it in eyesight. Now, let me betray one fundamental truth of media and storytelling. Don't be afraid of filler. Don't bloat or lose sight of the campaign, but you can give a great evil lad a break to work on a passion project in the background. From there, the party may have to worry about a separate villain. Let's say your great evil lad is an ancient black dragon who wants to raise a cult of necromancers and probably eradicate all the sentient life of the world. But what if the party is licking their wounds, and in the great chase of this dragon, a village is lit ablaze in the dead of night by a group of goblin raiders? The party helps fend off what they can of the initial attack, but maybe in hearing the plights of the villagers, they realize they can't turn their back on the helpless villagers. Additionally, see if you can think of a way of tying it back into the plot. What if the king has an ancient ceremonial suit of armor that is immune to all forms of acidic corrosion, and if the villagers are freed from the Goblin King's attack, he'll grant the party the usage of the armor in their upcoming fight with the dragon? Or maybe your party had a heavy episode and needs to fight out how to overcome some skill challenges, and a village is about to flood, and they have to help figure out how to make a makeshift dam with the supplies the village has on hand. Allow them to have focused character moments for either self-reflection, romance, exploration of the world at large, or the intimate connections of close allied NPCs. If you're aiming to tell shorter, quick-fire stories, there's nothing wrong with that, but gear your research to help you look for the right avenues. Next month, I should be participating in a 5-room dungeon jam, and that's one that's quite popular for being able to be both a dungeon structure and a story structure at the same time. There's a lot of resources out there, and if you're stuck, give it a Google or a YouTube search. It's a very well talked about subject matter. Or tune in next month. Okay, so we're closing down on the storytelling tips, so let me leave you with a big one. This is your friendly reminder. You're the storyteller. Your hands are ultimately on the wheel of pacing. Going too fast? Pump the brakes. Dragging along? Let's get a lead foot. It's all very, very doable, just so long as everyone is having fun. I know I didn't come up with a whole Magpie's method for it, but remember, all things boil down to scope, fun, and control. There's no right answer, there's no surefire method. Just like dragons, stories can take any form, and can be told in any sort of way, so my biggest piece of advice of work is to not worry about it. Typically, it'll work itself out, one way or another, but if you're really stressed out about it, you won't be any good to anyone. Now, that's a lot said about dragons, and a little bit about story structure. This bird's wings are growing tired. I doubt this will be the end of the discussion on dragons, and if you've made it this far, thanks and thanks again. I mean that. It takes a lot of time to juggle all the other elements of my life and make these silly video essays that I get hyperfixated on. What do I want you to take away from all of this? Dragons can be anything. Small to colossal, goodest of good to vilest villains. Old, young. You get the point. It's wonderful that they're so intrinsically tied to human history and culture. It gives them a defining role, which I think leads me to this thesis. Wherever dragons go, let them be mighty. Yes, dragons are a human concept of what it means to be greater than the world, beyond the facilitations of nature. Do you hear that? That echoing roar, the mighty beat of their wings. Be cautious going forward, adventurers, because there be dragons. Thanks and thanks again. Magpie responsibly.